All right. So we've talked about various characteristics of quadratics, and one of them are the roots. So for learning target 4, we're going to be solving a quadratic equation just using square roots. So the actual solving will be pretty easy, but the concept behind it is what's really most important. So the first question, and this is on your notes too, is why do we even care about solving quadratics for y equals 0? The reason that we solve them for y equals 0 is that it can show us where the zeros are. And I know that seems pretty like, well, duh, obviously. But when we solve for y equals 0, we're finding the zeros. We're also finding where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, and then once we know that, we looked at the before class yesterday, and we've looked at several ways that that is important. Okay, so finding the roots of a quadratic is actually really important for various things. So in order to solve them, to find the roots, we need to plug in y equals 0. So why do we solve quadratics for y equals 0? Most simply just to find the roots where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So this equation here has two roots. The first one is at 2. The second is at 6. Okay, and if we go to some examples, like I said, these are going to be real simple just to solve them, but keep in mind the concept of like always knowing that like when you're finding the 0, when you're plugging in y equals 0, you're finding the 0, and that's where it crosses the x-axis. So all we're going to do for these examples, solve each equation for x when y equals 0, and then be sure to just write down all the steps that that you use in order to find x. So the first thing we have to do is take that y equals 0 and just plug that in for y right there, just substituting like we've done tons of times before. Instead of y, we're just going to have 0. That just makes this x squared equals 16. And we've solved something like this before, but just in case you've forgotten, if you have x squared on the left side, to undo that x squared, you're just going to take the square root of both sides. And if I square root that side, I have to square root that side. So over here, the squared and the square root, those all just cancel each other out. Okay, so they're kind of, they're opposites of each other. They're just like multiplying and dividing are opposites. So you're left with just an x. The square root of 16 is 4. It's also, and this is really important that you don't forget this, it's also negative 4. So it's going to be important that you have both answers written down on like a test question or something like that. The next example, again, plug in y equals 0. X squared minus 81 equals 0. I'm just going to add 81 to both sides. Get x squared equals 81. And then just like what you had up here, square root the x squared. And so then you have to square root the 81. That squared and the square root cancel each other out. You have x equals 9 and negative 9. Again, don't forget that and negative 9. Down here we got a whole bunch more numbers. It looks really confusing. It's still just as simple as all the rest of these. I'm just going to copy down x minus 2 squared plus 1 equals 50. And then this would be just a plus 0 because remember we're putting in y equals 0. There's going to be a few extra steps in this one, but it's basically just the same solving an equation that you've always done. So it's really not a whole lot harder. First subtract 1 from both sides. You're going to have x minus 2 squared equals 49. From this point, since you have this whole side squared, this is where you'll take the square root. So you don't want to get rid of this minus 2 first. Okay, because that'll kind of screw you up and it won't be correct. So First, you'll have to square root both sides from this point, since you have that whole side squared. So I'm actually just going to do that entire thing, x minus 2 squared, and square root that whole thing, and then also square root the 49. Remember, all that's going to cancel, so I'm just going to have an x minus 2 equals 7 and also negative 7. There is going to be one more step from this point because you do still have to get rid of this minus 2 over here. So what your answers are going to be is you're actually going to add 2 to both sides, so you're going to add 2 to both answers here. So what you're going to get for your answers are x equals 9 and negative 5. Okay, and that'll be your final answer then. So what this is saying for each equation is that the roots of x squared equals 16 plus y, if you were to look at a graph of that, you would expect it to cross the x-axis at 4 and negative 4. Same with these others. So this last one, you would expect this big equation right here, x minus 2 squared plus 1 equals 50 plus y. You would expect to see that graph cross the x-axis at x equals 9 and x equals negative 5. Okay. Your before class then is just a bunch of similar things. Okay. Here we've actually taken out a step for you because before, where you had to put in the y equals 0, that's already done. So really all you have to do is solve each one of these for x, and you will have found the roots already.